Good day, everyone. I'm Wade Fox. I'm your host for this session of Second Opinion. We have a very, very interesting guest today, very important. We have Ann Wofford with us today, and she is running for one of the congressional districts here in the state of Massachusetts. And this is a national level situation, so we've asked her to come in to give a little bit background about her views and certainly about how she sees the Congress working in the future. Ann, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, great. Ann, why don't you give us, first off, a little background on the district, and then a little background about yourself and how you got into this position.
Certainly. Thank you again. I do appreciate being here. The district is 37 cities and towns. It has 4 that are in Essex County, where you have Haverhill on the east, and then it crosses over to 11 cities and towns in Worcester County. You kind of follow the New Hampshire border to Gardner and its suburbs, and then you kind of follow Route 2 down to Marlborough, Sudbury, Hudson on the 495 side of things. Comes up Concord, Carlisle, and then kind of wraps back around to Haverhill.
Okay, so Haverhill is the furthest
Furthest
point
east, yes.
Okay, great.
And Winchendon would be the furthest in the northwest, down to Marlborough, yes.
A little bit about your background, where you live, how you got into this.
Oh, certainly. I've lived in Haverhill now for 12 years. I did grow up in Massachusetts. I can't say I was born here. My dad was in the Army at the time. I didn't get here till I was 4, as soon as I could. And grew up in Western Mass in a suburb of Springfield. And then I went on to Cornell University, where I majored in chemical engineering. And then for the next 17 years, I worked as a chemical engineer in the private industry. And 2 years ago, I did run for this position. It was the first time I'd ever run for a political office, and I really was at the point where we needed some change and we needed some action. And I'm running again 2 years later because we are talking about all the same things we were talking about 2 years ago, and it's worse. So that is why I'm running. That's where I'm from, and I've lived in Haverhill, by the way, for 12 years.
Okay, great. Well, you know, this year is a very politically charged year, if I can say that almost as an understatement. What do you see as, when you get to be our next Congresswoman, what are the 3 major issues you think that the Congress needs to address outside of whoever the president is?
We need to focus on jobs and the economy. This is a constant theme. This was here when I was out getting signatures in the spring. This comes up today, and when you look at the unemployment numbers today and you look at them before the Great Recession, you know, you're looking at the same percentage. But just look at ourselves or our neighbors and we know the economy is not the same. Folks are stuck in jobs with no upward mobility. There has been a wage stagnation. We have lost an entire generation of entrepreneurs. Folks have not been able to go take those risks because they're afraid they will have nothing to go back to. So the economy needs to start moving again. I think the phrase, you know, the business of America is business, and we need to get back to business. So that is definitely by far the #1 issue here for this district.
Okay, the second issue would be what?
You know, illegal immigration, it is a topic that continues to be discussed. And 2 years ago, when we were talking about immigration here, there wasn't a sanctuary city in the 3rd District. And today we have one. Lawrence is now a sanctuary city. I don't think that's good for this district. I said 2 years ago, no federal funding for sanctuary cities. I say it today because we are a nation of laws. And if you want to change a law or not follow a law, you need to change it, not just say we're not going to follow the laws and do our own thing. Now, I do want to clarify on immigration. I am all for immigration, for legal immigration. My maternal grandmother emigrated from County Mayo, Ireland. This generation, I have 2 brother-in-laws, one that legally immigrated to this country from Sri Lanka, and another one that legally immigrated to this country from Iraq. So I'm all for legal immigration. But what I said 2 years ago, and I say it again now, is we have to secure our borders, because we're not a nation if we don't have borders. And we're still talking about it 2 years later. Nothing, again, has happened. In fact, it's worse. We still have another surge of folks coming across the border. I have said, I know everyone talks about the wall. I I kind of go back to what former Governor Rick Perry said. He said selective fencing, you know, using our natural resources, work with your southern governors to go ahead and have, yes, some type of a wall or selective fencing across the southern border. Use E-Verify. Enforce our current laws, because we're not. They're picking and choosing. And we've had a couple incidents in Lowell. In Haverhill, where I live, we had the 2 illegal immigrants that were accused of raping a lady there in the park on a Friday evening. Questions about why were they still here, one been deported, come back. Questions about one who at 17, the Obama administration had changed the rules. He was considered a minor, so he was allowed to stay. This needs to stop. You know, we just need to go back to being a nation of laws where we follow the laws.
So in effect, you're saying that we do have walls, they're just not very effective. And, you know, if we follow the laws, we probably wouldn't have this conversation right now.
And secure the borders, yes. But we do have to, it's a very porous border, so we do need to secure that. We need to enforce folks who overstay their visas. You know, that's a large population as well. So it goes back to following our laws. And then, if we realize we need to change them, we go ahead through Congress and we change them.
Okay. So you've got jobs, you've got immigration. What would be the third one that you'd probably want to work on?
Well, I will actually tell you an issue that has come up in this election that I did not foresee in the spring when I was getting signatures, and it is the Second Amendment. What we have had happen over the summer, and well, all over the summer I suppose is really what brought it up, is we had that atrocity in Orlando. And we know that that was an act of terrorism. And we need to first off call it that and address it appropriately. And all our 9 Democrat congressmen and our Democrat senators did a sit-in protesting guns and essentially saying this is all because of guns. Then we had our Attorney General, Maura Healey, take a look at a 1998 law that hasn't changed, the federal equivalent of which was let to expire several years ago because it didn't prove it made any difference one way or the other. And she simply changed her interpretation of this 1998 law. And all of a sudden, all these legal gun owners, their guns are not going to be legal. You know, you can't go buy that gun now because of her interpretation. You know, I have publicly stated she needs to be sued under the Second Amendment in the federal courts. Right now, really, we haven't seen a lot of action at our state level on this. But I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I have a Class A license to carry. I had it when I ran last time, before I ran, and I have it for home defense. My husband, he still works some nights, but he used to work a lot more nights. We do have a dog now as well. But you know, we have young children. We're going to defend our home, our property, and so I am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and I definitely think we're wide apart on that issue.
Do you think that the Congress will be a moderating influence on whoever becomes a president on some of these issues? Such
I
as
think
the
so.
Second Amendment and so
I think
forth?
so. I mean, if we're talking about, you know, there are folks who want to, what I have seen, and I think what most legal gun owners will tell you is it's getting harder and harder for us to purchase a gun, purchase bullets. We're the ones getting hurt. The folks who are obtaining these illegally are going to continue to obtain these illegally. And when we look at the gun violence that we've seen in our nation, we need to focus on mental health. That is an issue that 2 years ago we need to start to look at. I said, we know there are problems. When things changed at the end of the 70s, no other action was ever taken. A lot of folks, it hasn't been addressed. There hasn't been those support systems. So mental health, and then homegrown terrorism. How are we fighting it? That's your next set of gun violence incidents. So these are the 2 areas that Congress can focus on if they want to reduce gun violence without limiting our Second Amendment rights.
Okay. Well, let's change gears a little bit right now if we can. Okay. You know, I seem to bring this up. I know people are probably getting tired of me saying it out there, but you know, we got tagged as being the bluest of the blue states.
Yes.
And since you mentioned the fact that we have a bunch of Democrats that are staging sit-ins and God knows whatever else. How would you see yourself functioning as a Republican in a very democratic state group? How would you work with them for the betterment of the state, given the fact that you are a Republican? And do you see that as a advantage maybe for the state of Massachusetts by having some, shall we say, balance of having Republicans and Democrats in the congressional caucus that we send down to Washington?
I think it's a huge advantage. The biggest thing is when we're talking about the 2016 election cycle, nobody is talking about the Republicans losing the House of Representatives. They will stay the majority party. We don't have anybody there in that majority party. One of the things I do believe, being a Republican from Massachusetts, I will get the committees I want in the House of Representatives, which means I can do the most good and work on the main issues that I see. I would love to be on the Judiciary Committee, which in the House of Representatives deals with immigration. So we can work on securing our border and enforcing our laws, making sure that funding is there. And the second one is the Government Oversight Committee. Having been a chemical engineer for 17 years, I have seen firsthand and dealt with the impact of overregulation. And please, I will never say we don't need any regulation. If you just look at the Environmental Protection Agency, we need an Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA. But if you ask the folks in Flint, Michigan, if they think the EPA is doing its job, they would probably tell you no. You know, clean water is a basic element of the EPA. If you look at the Animas River in Colorado, that turned yellow just a couple of years ago here, not even. That again was a result of the EPA's actions. And those heavy metals are still there. They need to be cleaned up. We need to have our regulatory agencies going back to their original focus and why they were there. And keep in mind, if you look at 2015, for every law passed by Congress, 30 new regulations were issued by the Obama administration. That has to stop. We have to go back to having our laws coming from the folks we elect.
Okay. I guess one of the things I wanted to kind of get to right now is you gave us your top three. Now, obviously, when you go to Washington, you have to deal with a lot of other things, but there are two that I'd like to that kind of tag into what you talked about. And the first one is I'd like to hear a little bit about your thoughts about climate change.
Okay.
And after you get through that, I got one more that kind of goes along with the employment situation. So what's your thoughts about climate change and so forth?
Well, I am an engineer and I do follow the science. And one of the things that has not got a lot of press is some of the data that's been reported that's not accurate. The pressure that has been put on scientists to tell a narrative. If you go to the IPCC, and this is an intergovernmental body, they will tell you there has been no data that shows any global warming since 1996. I kind of paraphrase Charles Krauthammer, where he says, you know, do I think we should be, you know, having a lot of pollutants in the atmosphere? No, I don't, obviously. But you need to be doing the doable. There is a point where you have social and economic, you know, I don't think devastation is the right word. Well, for the coal industry it would be. But there's a point, there's a tipping point where you're doing more harm than good. If you're shutting down an industry, if you're raising everybody's electricity rates, there's a balance. And that's where I am. Do we need to regulate it? Do we want to be putting all these pollutants in the atmosphere? Absolutely not. But is there a point where we're saying, you know, China's the #1 polluter, India's, what, #3? We need them to start making some changes as well before we completely destroy some of our industries, lose a lot of jobs, and bring the cost of living up for every single American. So there's a balance that does need to be maintained. And I think coming at this from the chemical engineering side, having dealt with these regulations, having to have to do several cost analysis on what is the true cost, when are you really close enough, that is something I will definitely bring to Congress.
Okay, well then let me go to the last one, which is trade agreements. Okay, and I'm thinking in terms of the way we do things with immigration, the way we talk about security and so forth, and particularly about jobs. There's a lot of discussion about trade agreements, whether they're good or bad for the United States. And I would suppose that it's like talking about nuclear power. It's good or bad depending upon how you use it. How do you see the U.S. functioning in this globalized world? Because a lot of people are saying it's better to be that way. There are others to say, no, you've got to learn to take care of yourself. And I'm saying this only in the relationship that you saw what the people in the UK said, that they eventually said we're going to exit from the EU because of certain issues, but it may affect our trade. So how do you see us functioning in the the globalization of trade as it has progressed over the last 15 years, given some of the things that we see, such as the Pacific, well, NAFTA we know about, but the Pacific trade agreements and so forth that are going to be hitting the Congress next year?
Well, we need to revisit NAFTA. I think we've seen the results and what it's done to our economy on that and our jobs. I have read the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the TPP. I am opposed to it. We could discuss the numerous elements and why I have objections to this. Do I believe in free trade? Yes. But one, it has to always go through Congress, all the trade agreements. I will not give up that power for the House of Representatives, for the Congress with the executive branch and the presidency there. And you know, I said this with the Affordable Care Act, and I've said this with comprehensive immigration reform, and I'll say this with the TPP. Congress is not into comprehensive anything. That doesn't work. All right, when you take a look at the TPP, there's an entire section on intellectual property. It shouldn't even be in this agreement. We need to handle intellectual property separately because as Americans, we actually do handle this differently than a lot of other countries. So right there, that needs to go out of it. And again, it's this whole thing that Congress has gone to where they do these massive bills and try to cover everything, and that does not work. We need to go back to keeping it simple, sustainable, and effective. And that is not what the TPP will do.
Well, as you were talking about that, I'm reminded that if I'm not incorrect, that the speaker Nancy Pelosi at the time said, we should pass it. And somebody asked her if she had read it. She said, no, I don't have time to read it. We'll pass it, and then we'll get around to reading it, which I think that they used to call it cruise missile management, ready, fire, aim. We seem to be spinning with these massive, just sign it and everything will take care of itself approaches. How do you see Congress stepping in and shall we say really reasserting itself, regardless of who's the president? I mean, I think to be very blunt, I think there's a lot of Republicans out there. I include myself as one, that said, we have given the Republican Party the majority in the House and the Senate, and yet we would look at this and say, well, they really have not stopped a lot of the stuff that we thought should have been debated. It's just been done by fiat, by the president, and as we would say, there was no, shall we say, punishment for overstepping the legislative bounds. So when you get in there, how would you ask the Congress to act differently than they've been acting the last 8 years?
Well, first off, I will read the bills. I think that's a big deal. Make sure you have time to read the bills. Make sure there is debate. I will always answer for my votes. I will post them on social media, why I voted the way I did. So you have a record. You can always go back and see it. The Affordable Care Act, I actually think that's one of the biggest disasters that our Congress and our president have done. I know myself, our family, just in the last year alone, we had our first ER trip with our oldest daughter, and had she done this in December, the copay would have only been $150, but it was $250. That is a massive increase. Our generic prescriptions in December were $15. They're $25 now. Our deductibles have gone up, our costs have gone up, our care has not increased. In fact, our choices are more limited. So, I said 2 years ago we needed to go to common sense solutions. Basic economics, sell across state lines. All right, that's going to give you more choices, bring down the cost. Forcing everyone into these plans, there are folks who literally, very healthy, want a catastrophic plan, that's it. They should be able to do that without paying a fine. You know, I do think health savings accounts will work. And I don't mean what we do today with our prescriptions. If you don't spend it, you lose it, you know, where you submit them in to get the money back. Where, you know, we know that when you're in your 80s, you're going to spend more on your health care than you do in your 20s. Set it aside, tax-free, go ahead, put it in there. So when you need it, it's there. And you know what? If you don't spend it all, you can pass it down to the next generation's HSAs. So those are some things that'll work. And we just need to go back to common sense. You know, health insurance doesn't equal health care. And I know a lot of folks who found that out. You know, they brought a child in with a broken arm and thought everything would be covered. No, their deductibles were so high, their co-pays. You know, this is something where I almost feel like folks were deceived by the Affordable Care Act. It's not affordable, and it's not the right solution.
Okay. Well, let's kind of circle back to the election here as we kind of wind down here. What would you say let's say the 2 or 3 biggest differences between you and the incumbent in this race are? What would you say if somebody said, well, why should I vote for you?
I think the Affordable Care Act is a big difference. She supported it, she voted for it, she still supports it. I do not. And I think we're all going to have another big hit come November 1 and we see our plans for next year. You know, she supports the Iran deal. I do not support the Iran deal. I have read that. I think that's another foreign policy disaster. She does not believe Syrian refugees, and again, this is just the last 2 years, should have increased vetting. I do. Not only that, but I've said this is really something we should be handling in the Middle East. That'll actually cost us less money. We can do it better, and then we don't have to worry about potential terrorist threats coming into our nation. There's another big gap. If we're talking about the economy and jobs, just ask yourself, you know, she continues to vote to increase the debt. We don't have an income problem. We have a spending problem with Congress, and that is where the power of the House of Representatives is. It is in the spending. And I would say we have a general philosophical difference. Whereas she believes the federal government is there to answer every single one of your questions and be involved in every single aspect of your life, I don't. I look at it as more as how do we make sure the federal government is not impeding you in what you want to do, whether it be Dodd-Frank, which she supports. I do not. I have seen that hurt so many folks on the small business side trying to expand or grow. I say go back to Glass-Steagall. I know Bernie said a 21st century Glass-Steagall, but I say go back to the original. It worked. And then if we do need to make some modification, let Congress go ahead and make that modification. Okay.
Well, I think we're getting a pretty good feeling about how you stand on these things, and certainly an in-depth and thoughtful answers to these things. I know that probably a lot of people would sit there and say, she makes a lot of sense, but, it's always the famous but. Mm-hmm. This is a Democratic state. Why would she win? Okay, which is always kind of the question that you have to ask when you have a statewide race like this. In preparation for this, I think you and I talked. You see things because you're out there talking to people on a very broad scale, and that's one of the great things about running for the Congress. You cover a lot bigger district than just Westford. What do you see as the differences in the electorate that makes this election different than what people have always used to?
2 years ago, there was a lot of apathy. I mean, people voted. This year, people are voting. And it's because there is definitely, when you look at it from an economic range in this district, and we have a wide range from Lawrence, again, now a sanctuary city, it wasn't 2 years ago, which always has the highest unemployment in the district, and then Fitchburg's right behind it. You look at Gardner. If you look at places where your economy isn't that good, where you have a higher middle class, is what I would say percentage of the population that have been getting by, but have really suffered from the wage stagnation versus the increasing costs and the lack of opportunities out there for a job or a better job. They believe, and I am with this, if you keep electing the same people, you will keep getting the same results. And what has been done for a generation is not working. And we're at that point where if we continue to do that, there will no longer be a middle class. So, you know, folks sit there and say, well, how can you go and vote for Trump? And I am voting for Donald Trump. And I will say, really? You know, how can you vote for someone who let 4 men die in Benghazi? How can you vote for someone who is part of the reason we have the Syrian crisis and ISIS growing today? How can you vote for someone who's never bothered to help the middle class in all the times they've had the opportunity to? And that's what it comes down to. If you keep voting for the same people, you will keep getting the same results. You know, when you're out there talking with folks having come from private industry, having grown up in a middle class family, work, study, student loans, everything like that, it's a different perspective. And we need a new perspective in Congress. So that way, really, what folks are calling the forgotten man, this whole section of the economy, is now accounted for. We now have a voice, and I would love to be that voice for the folks in Westford and the district.
And so you see the same, well, let me just say, the same concerns in Massachusetts that you see across the country, I guess.
In the 3rd District, yes. And I've always said the 3rd District is unique because it almost seems to be a miniaturized scale of the state. When you look at the Gardner area, the Concord-Carlisle area to Essex County, it really incorporates so many of the different areas. You know, you'd see just in Cambridge or just in Western Mass or down on the Cape, and it really covers all of it.
Great. Well, Ann, it's been a pleasure to have you on, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there would like to know how to help or get in contact with you during this campaign. Folks, there's not a lot of days left, but Ann, if you'd let us know how to get in touch with your organization, would be great.
You can always call 978-701-1920. We do get back to folks if you end up leaving a message. Again, 978-701-1920. Please feel free to look at our website. We have an issues page if there is some issue that is very important to you and we didn't cover it here. Hopefully it's there. If not, send us an email, and you can do that through the website. And the website is www.woffordforcongress.com, and there's only O's in Wofford. It's a WOFFORD, and then I do spell out the forcongress.com. And again, we will get back to you.
Ann, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And everyone, just remember that if you got any questions, always make sure you get a second opinion.